Chapter 25. San Diego. It took a full week for her face to feel normal again. Of course, her face was nothing to how Margot had made her feel since. Emma considered how she must have felt after the Halloween party, but the two situations were drastically different. At least Margot had Jordan. Valentine's Day would have been insufferable with them regardless, but with her own boyfriend gone without a trace, it felt like just another Saturday of longing for him to return safe and sound. Overhearing them fight provided some catharsis. Unable to set foot in the common room without fearing another attack from Margot, one she knew would be impossible to prosecute given she had attacked Margot first, Emma waited an entire week to see her family so her mother wouldn't comment on her face, and she would then be forced to explain everything. Combined with the travel ban and the eerie feeling that she was being watched for her own protection, the entire month of February was the loneliest she had felt since Riley left. The worst part was she couldn't blame Margot. The longer Emma sat with what had happened, why she had done what she had and what had come since, the more she realized just how justified Margot had been to call her out and expose her. Trying to defend her father was pointless, especially knowing now that Richmond was already involved thanks to Kent. It was only a matter of time before Bill Guerin was forced to resign from office, and now she couldn't even talk about it with her best friend. The bare minimum of respite came the following weekend, when she managed to get Rachel and Paige out on a coffee date. She hadn't really seen the pair since the school year had started, but things fell back to normalcy between them as soon as they sat down, save for the notable absence of Margot, who had always rounded out their foursome. She kept the details of their fight vague. Despite both their fathers working in the embassy, neither was high enough or close enough to her father's circle that she felt she could share what had happened. If either had heard about their lockdown or the bounty on Johnny's head, they kept it to themselves. Emma only went as far as taking responsibility for her side in the fight, after which both girls lauded her for being the bigger person, and shunned Margot for not getting over herself. The high of their date disappeared as soon as she left the shop. Pulled back into her shame, Emma found herself in the common room for the shortest of moments, long enough for Margot to pull herself off Jordan and stare Emma down until she was safely locked in her bedroom. Alone again, she stared up at the Lone Star above her bed and broke down until she had nothing left. Even church had lost its joy. She knew it was wrong to put Johnny first, but there was nothing she could do to stop from feeling left behind in her prayers. 2 Sundays on, her mother had noticed, and forcing her father and Andrew out to talk alone, Emma fell to pieces as she poured her heart out after the service. The next afternoon, she was pulled out of language by no less than an embassy guard, who escorted her to an emergency session with Jackie White. Jackie was an older man with an office just south of downtown. A bright white beard contrasted his dark brown face, obviously much older than any of the men still working in the embassy, though such a thing was common for non-members. He'd been the professional confidant of the family for years, bound by law and oath never to repeat the things they shared before him. From Emma's effect to Margot's childhood, he knew everything there was to know, and back in his office for the first time in months, Emma didn't hold back. She admitted everything, as far back as Liz's essay, not even stopping to think whether Jackie even knew about the embassy's brainwashing. She didn't care. As soon as she started her confession, there was nothing stopping her. She went through every single mistake she had made since October, detailing every wrong she had done to each person in the squad, even Liz and her family, and picked apart every way they had tossed her aside and their justifications for doing so. When she was finished, Jackie sat staring at her in silence. An enormous weight had been lifted off her shoulders, but she still felt terrible. Nothing had changed. Jackie's deep brown eyes pierced into hers. "Just tell me I'm not a bad person," she begged, out of tears. Jackie shook his head. "Emma, I'm not the judge of that," he spoke, his deep voice echoing off the walls around her. "I'm not God. I'm not your pastor."
"Then why am I here?"
she hesitated to ask, but Jackie answered before she could form the words. "My job is to help you work through your issues," he went on. "And what I'm seeing in all of this is you struggling to find your own value because of the mistakes you've made."
Emma buried her head in her hands. "So you're siding with them," she cried. "You think they're right? That I should just disappear off the face of the planet and die?"
"I never said that," he rejected. "And they don't think that."
"Well, Margot does," she shouted. "And honestly, she's probably right."
Jackie clicked his pen. "Has she ever actually said that to you?" Emma shook her head. "You made a mistake, and you feel guilty because you know it was wrong," he noted. "That doesn't make you a bad person."
"Then why do I feel like one?"
Jackie shrugged. "Because through all your mistakes, you value what's right more than what you've done." The words caught in Emma's throat as she tried to repeat them.
"Because... what?"
"I can see the anxiety you have in all of this," he explained. "You wear it on your face."
"Well, then how do I stop?" she asked. "I don't want to feel like this. I feel like everyone is out to get me all the time. I can't even set foot in our common room without Margot threatening me. She looked up pleadingly. "I want my friends back."
She burst into tears again. Jackie let her cry for several minutes before clearing his throat. "Why do any of us do the things we regret?" he began. Emma shook her head, unsure if his question was rhetorical. "Because deep down there are two sides vying for your attention. And sometimes it's not clear which is right from wrong until you've made that decision." Emma sighed. "I was only trying to protect my dad." "Answer me this," Jackie proposed. "Does your father really need your protection?" Before she could answer, he continued, "You obviously place a high value on what your father thinks of you. That's the reason you make the choices you do, isn't it? Because you know what's right, and yet you feel pressure to do the opposite. So I ask you again, does your father need your protection?" Emma took another deep breath, staring at the carpet between her feet. Before she could say anything, Jackie added, "Has he ever needed your protection before?" She thought back to all the times he had taken her to the backyard to work on her throwing. Had she been protecting him by playing into that lie? Uncertain of her answer, she gave the one Jackie wanted to hear. "No." Jackie smiled. "I don't think so either," he relayed. "You struggle between listening to yourself and listening to him, and that's okay. The weight of parental expectations is one of the greatest barriers any of us can face, but you especially, given who your father is and what he's expected out of you." Jackie's smile faded to a look of concern. "I imagine it's more difficult for you than most." "Then what can I do?" she asked. Jackie looked down at his notes. "What was it that Margot said?" he read. "Pretending to be your dad? Whether or not that's true, I think that's a decent place to start. You need to focus on being the person you want to be. Not your father, not even Margot. You." Emma shrugged. "I don't even know what that means." "I don't think any of us do," he stated honestly. "But deciphering which voice to follow is the first step." Emma took this into consideration.
"And in the meantime, am I just supposed to let them hate me?" she worried. "I can't go the rest of the year alone."
"Forgiveness will come," Jackie reassured. "You need to prove to them the same as you need to prove to yourself, that you're going to be the person you want to be. Once you trust in yourself, they'll trust in you too."
"And how long is that going to take?"
she wondered, desperate to trust that things could be exactly as they were before. Even without Johnny, if all of them could be on the same side. A weight like an iron curtain descended over her as she considered the different ways each of them believed she had wronged them. How much work would have to go into righting each individual fault. Death seemed the preferable option. She broke down again, Jackie keeping his distance and letting her cry until she was able to take a deep enough breath to speak again. With a hoarse voice, she asked,
"Where do I even start?"
She looked up with stinging eyes.
"Even Xander hates me."
"Clark Xander is a grown man," Jackie consoled. "If he's going to feud with a 14-year-old girl over a lapse in judgment, I'd be shocked. They don't let just anybody do that job, Emma. He's your leader." She sniffled again.
"Then where do I start with him?"
she begged. Jackie looked down at his pad and clicked his pen. "Start by showing him you're sorry," he advised. "It worked for you in the fall. I don't think Xander needs a grand gesture, just something to show him that you only mean the best. And if you believe that, communicate that. And he'll trust in that too." That weekend she showed up at Xander's house with half their baby registry in tow, with shipping expedited and security customs accelerated to get every item safely into the city by the time Emma requested. She hadn't even cared to look at the bill. Being back in Xander's good graces was worth more to her than any price tag. To her displeasure, he had taken that weekend to visit friends up in Bozeman without telling the squad, leaving Emma to unload a truck full of newborn toys and pregnancy-related groceries with Lisa, who was shocked into near-complete silence. She walked away from the experience embarrassed and disheartened, but remained hopeful for their eventual training time on Monday. Continuing as normal, Xander led the four through a series of hand-to-hand combat scenarios, hardly rewarding or critiquing her trials, and leaving her to fend for herself for most of the afternoon. However, once the others had equally left her behind in the dressing room after training, Xander stopped her before she could exit the classroom. It was as minimal as coughing loudly, giving a slight nod, and saying thank you in the most monotonous tone possible, but there was a look in his eye that gave Emma enough to believe something had changed. And so it had. By the middle of March, the situation in Poland had calmed enough for the embassy to lift the squad's protective travel ban. There were whispers that Chervinsky had fled to either Russia or China, with one user on Emma's Reddit thread convinced he had seen the former president in Sydney. Either way, the threat had lessened, and ahead of their scheduled spring break, they were finally allowed to leave the city. Andrew's original tour date had been pushed back a few weeks, but this now allowed Emma to accompany the rest of her family down to San Diego for the long weekend. The embassy was still worried about the safety of the Prime Minister and his family outside the safety of Taylorsville, so ahead of their trip, Emma returned to the preparation salon with her brother to have their hair and eyes changed to brown. Much to her father's indignation, they would also be accompanied by disguised security the entire trip. On Thursday morning, Emma failed to escape the common room before seeing Margot, who caught a single glance at her new look and noted, "And I thought the blonde looked trashy." She shook it off and stormed to the ground floor, where a car filled with the rest of her family was waiting to take her to the airport. Her father's private plane flew them up to Boise, an unusual route for the program, but the safest nearby location in case anyone in Chervinsky's sphere with knowledge of the program's travel habits was still on their tail. Like they did for the mission in Denver, they checked back in through the main terminal and boarded an Alaskan flight direct to San Diego. Touching down in California provided Emma with a hint of relief. She hated the state, but the nice weather felt far closer to Houston than Tylersville, so she was able to distract herself with false nostalgia. Their residence for the weekend was a timeshare resort north of the city, with the 2 rooms on either side of their suite housing their escorts. It wasn't until the doors were shut behind them that she saw her father's shoulders relax, throwing his business phone underneath a pillow in their bedroom and lounging on the couch to watch college basketball highlights. Friday, they spent the entire day at the zoo, which helped her mind off the squad back home. In her absence, Xander had apparently taken the other 3 to Breckenridge for the weekend, and despite knowing Kent had zero ability to ski even with his cast now off, she knew Margot and Jordan must have been having a blast. At least, that's what Margot's 15 status updates had her believe. Saturday morning, her mother left with Andrew and a pair of guards for an official tour of San Diego State. Despite their disguises, the necessitation of their real names had made her father cautious to join them, so she remained back at the resort with him. With the weather fair and the pool wide open, Emma set aside her reluctance at having one of the guards stalking her every move and outfitted herself in a red 2-piece to boost her own confidence. At least with Margot out of the way, she could finally feel secure enough to tan without distraction. 30 minutes into her pool day, clouds covered the sun, putting an end to the slight browning she was able to add atop the day before. She tried both the pool and the hot tub, but both left her unsatisfied with their temperatures, and she frustratedly walked back to the room. Her father must not have been expecting her back so soon. He was pacing back and forth on the balcony, the sliding door ajar enough for her to hear, but not for him to notice her enter the room. His free hand was running nervously through his hair. At the mention of the other participant, Emma froze, ducking around the corner to overhear. "Shane, that's not what he was saying urgently. "That wasn't—" His deputy was evidently interrupting him on the other end. "I know," her father repeated. "I know." Another lap of silence. "Well, tell whoever it is that we don't deal like that." He slammed his hand down on the balcony railing. "I don't care what was promised," he shouted. "This wasn't supposed to—" Shane continued to cut him off. "If you had done your job, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place." Another pause. "Then figure out the details," he screamed. "I've told you everything I can." Emma had her ear as close to the corner as possible, trying to catch anything that might be coming through the phone. "Well, then help me," he concluded. "Get us out of this mess." The door slid open further, and her father stormed into the room. She could hear him throw his phone hard against the couch cushions and sprinted into her bathroom, turning on her shower to avoid looking suspicious. She emerged awkwardly, making her way into the main living room as casually as she could manage. "That was quick," he noted. Emma looked up, biting her tongue to remain expressionless. "Clouds," she pointed out through the balcony window. He looked out at where he'd been standing, then back to her for an uncomfortably long silence. He eyed her up and down, and for a moment she feared the worst. To her surprise, his eyes calmed, and he called her over to the couch. "Come here," he instructed. "I need to talk to you about something." She was biting her tongue so hard she thought it might bleed, but sitting in the chair to his left, he took the conversation in an unexpected direction. "Care to explain why you spent nearly $1,000 on baby clothes this month?" He turned his head accusingly. Then, in a tone that was almost mocking, added, "I know for a fact you're not pregnant." "It was for Xander," she defended quickly. "I was just trying to help them out with their registry." "Helping is buying a few items," he said. "You practically stocked the kid's entire childhood." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. "I'm assuming this was some sort of apology token?" he added. She could feel her face redden with embarrassment, before a blanket of dread passed over her. "How do you know that you're in hot water with your entire squad?" "Jackie's not supposed to tell you anything," she squeaked. "Relax," he calmed, putting his hand up. "You told your mother, remember? She and I do in fact tell each other things." Emma's embarrassment overtook her dread. "How much did she tell you?" Her father leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "I'm assuming most of the basics," he judged. "That was a pretty rotten thing you did with the Grand Hook girl." She opened her mouth again, but her father interrupted. "That much I learned from Xander," he admitted. "He told me immediately after he figured out what you did." "He snitched on me?" she roared. "Stop acting like a child," the Prime Minister ordered, his own face darkening in seriousness. "He didn't snitch on you. He told me because he's worried about you." Emma swallowed hard, her father's words hanging in the air. "What? Why do you think everyone's out to get you?" he furthered. "Why are you so quick to jump to ill intentions?" She stuttered. You mean he's not mad at me?" "Oh, he's furious with you," he disagreed. "I'm furious with you. But my anger comes from the fact that above all else, I'm just plain disappointed." Emma could feel the heat rising through her throat. I was just trying to save you." "Save me?" He tossed his head back incredulously. "Why in the world would I need your help saving me?" "The trial!" she shouted. The Granhooks!" "You coerced that boy to lie under oath," he backtracked. "I don't know what you threatened him with before, but he's in far more trouble for that than—" "You called me!" she screamed. "In China, you told me you could lose your job and then you freaked out on me. Destroy the phone, Emma. I mean, what else was I supposed to do? I was just trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," he roared. "When I said that, He paused, a nervous look crossing his eyes for the slightest of seconds before he took a deep breath. "Look," her father continued, far calmer than before. "I shouldn't have made you do that. There were things happening that—" He paused again, shaking his head. "Never mind. Ignore what I had you do. When I said I could lose my position, I was speaking in the most minute possible chance that this trial turns out for the worst. It's not." "But there's a chance," she echoed. "Hardly," he defended. "Emma, when you're in my position, you have to consider every single possibility presented before you. Hell, there's even the most minute chance a plane could come crashing through this building at any moment. And you and I, that's still a chance." "Fine," he deflected. "If you need to hear it that way, fine. There is zero chance you or I are in any danger because of what happened in China. Therefore, you have zero reason to bully people into doing your dirty work because you think it's what I want out of you. Is that clear?" Emma kept herself stoic, not willing to give in to this new command so easily. Her father sat up quickly. "You want proof?" He rose to his feet and rushed to his bedroom, re-emerging seconds later with a briefcase. Sitting back down, he pulled out a pair of papers and handed them to Emma. It was a letter, handwritten by her father. There were no seals or titles anywhere on the page, except to whom it was addressed. Mr. and Mrs. Granhook. In no fewer than 5 paragraphs, her father had taken complete responsibility for the death of their daughter, signing it at the bottom in his full printed name, William Thomas Guerin. Emma turned the page and felt her jaw drop. Behind the letter, still attached to its printed bank page, was a check for over £1 million British pounds. Her father let her sit in silence for a few moments before she looked up. "I was planning on mailing that out as soon as we get home," he stated. Emma was still mesmerized by the numbers, the sincerity of the letter. Finally, she found her voice. "You really think this will stop them from going to trial?" "Oh, for God's sake, Emma!" he shouted, rising to his feet and snatching the pages from her hand. "This isn't about the trial. This is about doing the right thing." She grit her teeth, trying to maintain a foot in the conversation. "You're paying them off," she noted. "When did I say that?" he huffed. "This is still going to trial, Emma. Nowhere in that letter do I beg them not to. If anything, I hope they do go to trial. And as much as it'll burn the company, I hope for their sakes they win." "But," Emma struggled. "But your job—" "I'm not going to lose my job," he assured. "You're paying out of my own pocket," he pointed out. "It's not a payoff, it's a payout. I cashed in your life insurance policies, and I'm giving it to the Granhooks as a show of good faith. Brant Granhook will never have to work another day in his life. They still have 3 kids who will have to go through the program, unless, God forbid, they lose 2 more of them. It's the least we can do." Emma was shocked into silence. "But that—" she tried. Her father watched her struggle. "I don't know what you've learned from me over the last 14 years, but obviously I have failed you significantly when it comes to compassion," he stated. "I don't know where the disconnect happened, but it's become apparent to me that you aren't the daughter I thought you were." He stared into her with sorrowful disappointment. "You will never be the daughter I want you to be," he repeated. "And I need to be okay with that." Emma felt herself close to tears. "But whoever you are now, that needs to change," he continued. "You are doing nothing but hurting the people close to you for reasons that you've made up in your own head. And I will not stand by while it continues to happen. When we get home, you're going to make things right with every single person in that squad and stop making such immature, selfish decisions." His eyes burrowed into her. "Do I make myself clear?" She forced herself to speak. "Yes, Daddy," He ignored her as he turned on more basketball, leaving her to sit there awkwardly and stew on everything he had said. Another wave of panic flowed through her, and feeling herself ready to vomit with anxiety, ran to her bedroom and slammed the door behind her. The other two returned a few hours later, Andrew dressed in a new red sweatshirt adorned with the school wordmark in big black letters. Emma could hear her father excitedly asking about the tour from the other side of the door, and took a stilling breath to compel herself through it. Her mother was eyeing the pair angrily, but Emma was still too shaken from earlier to ask. That evening, the Prime Minister allowed her and Andrew time alone while he and her mother spent time touring the local military museum. That still left them with 2 escorts, but somehow that felt infinitely less restricting than their parents trailing 20 feet behind. The words her father had said were still racing through her mind, and desperate for a distraction, Emma wanted nothing more than to call Riley for comfort. But given the time change, Andrew would have to be her best alternative. He had the car drop them at Mission Beach, which was crowded with tourists this time of day. If the guards had any reservations letting them walk amongst so many people, they didn't make it known, instead giving the pair a head start as Andrew led the way to the south. They stopped for fish tacos at a stand off the boardwalk, after which they continued their journey to the shore. A boy about 12 years old stared at Emma as they walked past his sandcastle. Several meters further on, 2 girls probably her own age kept making awkward glances up at Andrew, even after they had crossed paths, repeatedly giggling between looks. Emma turned to see their escorts 10 meters behind, matching stride in an awkward attempt at casual that exposed them less as undercover agents and more of a romantic pairing. "They spotted anyone yet?" Andrew muttered over her shoulder in Spanish. "What?" She turned. "I bet there's 1,000 people here," he continued. "Any one of them could hit us for Chervinsky. You think those 2 would stop him?" Emma turned again. The guards pretended not to be watching them. I don't think that's really the point." "Well, to hell with the point," he bludgeoned. "This guy right here could shank us both before they could do a thing." He gestured to a man with large headphones on his shoulders, who casually rode past them on rollerblades. "Is that why you're speaking Spanish?" she asked. "Half the people here can still understand you." "You know why I'm speaking Spanish," he noted. Emma couldn't give a definitive yes or no. "Want one?" Andrew held out a white roll of paper which took her several seconds to recognize as a cigarette. "Ew, no," she cringed. "What are you doing?" He rescinded the offer and shoved it into his own mouth. "Relax," he said, unsheathing a lighter from his pocket. "I'm 18. "Where did you even get that?" Andrew took a long breath. "Don't worry about where I got it." Emma turned back to their escorts, who were now glaring in their direction. They can see you doing that," she warned. "They'll tell Dad." "Good," he huffed. "I hope they do." Emma rolled her eyes, trying to find comfort in his disobedience. "You're a nightmare." "Thanks," he mumbled before taking it out of his mouth again. "Mom told me that twice today." Emma turned, trying to ignore the cigarette. "What'd you do?" "Same old," he shrugged. "Made a joke at orientation I probably shouldn't have made. Got pulled aside for it and warned that thing doesn't fly around SDSU. Shut up and join the rest of the tour." Emma frowned, unsurprised. "What was the other?" Andrew tapped down the cigarette and looked at her longingly. "I told her the truth." She felt herself slowing down. "The truth?" Andrew took another hard inhale. "That I want to stay." Emma was taken by surprise. "What, in Tylersville?" Andrew nodded, causing her to add, "What's there left for you in Tylersville?" Andrew looked out at the ocean. "Everything?" Emma stared, trying to figure out what he meant. Andrew turned and caught her gaze. "I don't want to go to school," he admitted. "I just want to stay home and work. I can visit Uncle Mark on the weekends, but otherwise I'm content just staying put." She felt herself numb with concern. "Just staying put," she repeated. "Andrew, you're not 21. You know that means you have to serve?" he interrupted, stomping out the cigarette as they continued walking. "You don't get it, do you?" He looked at her curiously. "You don't feel it?" "Feel what?" "The rush of it," he said. "The wanting to get back to it." "Another mission?" she puzzled. "Andrew, you've done more than anyone on the planet. You've done enough for the company. You can relax now." "And why do you think that is, Amita?" His eyes were invigorated. "Because I love it. I get a high from it." "You lost your entire squad," she reminded harshly. "You deserve a break." "I don't want a break," he explained. "Sitting still kills me. That's why I started drinking again." He shook his head. "I don't get how you're fine just sitting there waiting out the semester until you get to do another one." "Sitting still kills you?" she quoted. "Going on another mission is going to kill you. Especially at the rate you're going.
Mom and Dad have a reason to want you out. They're trying to keep you safe.
Andrew laughed.
What's so funny? She barked.
He shook his head again. I only started pushing to impress Dad, he went on. Dad got exactly what he wanted out of me. He looked at her meaningfully. Don't make my mistake. Emma felt an anxious pressure building in her chest, finding herself back with her father alone in the suite.
What's that supposed to mean?
Andrew shrugged, his eyes catching a brown-haired girl in a crop top as she passed. Dad wants us hooked on the system, he noted, teaching us everything he can so he can hand off the keys to the kingdom. His eyes darkened. I guess I just got hooked on the wrong thing. Emma took a deep breath, staring off at the water to keep her anxiety down. She turned her sympathies back to her brother. So you're really not coming back here? She asked. What about Rice or Kansas State? More of Dad's dreams, Andrew sighed.
Well, where's Uncle Mark nowadays?
Spearfish?
They have a school, don't they? She added. You could...
Emma, he frowned. You don't get it. I don't want to leave. I have too much to leave behind.
What do you have to leave behind? She screamed. Your squad is dead. What can you possibly...
The answer quite literally stepped into view. A woman with long blonde hair and a revealing top was just over 20 meters ahead of them. Andrew blushed, seeing her too, and turned his face to the ground until she passed. Emma turned to him once the woman had gone.
Pema? She growled. You're staying in Tylersville for Pema? Andrew, she's like 30.
She's 28, he replied quickly.
And it's not just her, it's...
He paused, trying to figure out his words. Unable, he exhaled and shook his head. Emma could feel herself redden with anger.
You broke up with Isla again for her, didn't you?
Emma, he sighed.
How are you going to explain this to Mom and Dad?
What? You think they don't know? He turned, a bizarre mix of emotions showing in his blue eyes. Honestly, I'd be shocked if they didn't.
Dad knows? Emma squeaked. And he's just okay with it?
Of course he's not. Andrew stopped himself, turning back to the ground. You wouldn't get it.
No, explain it to me, she begged. Why can't you realize what she's doing to you?
You really don't get it, he breathed. Nothing I can say to you will ever make you understand it. Emma was waiting for him to turn back and face her, but he kept avoiding her gaze. A pair of Navy helicopters flew overhead on their way back to the nearby base.
How do you expect Dad to understand it? She wondered aloud.
Andrew kept his eyes on the horizon. What's going on with you and Margot? He asked. I wasn't finished, she thought, but saw the desperation to change the subject on his face. She kept walking in frustrated silence, wanting more than anything to belittle his decision, but Andrew stayed firm in his expression. There was nothing more he was willing to say on the matter. She gave in to the question.
You mean the fact that she hasn't spoken to me in over a month? Emma challenged.
Yeah, he agreed. I've noticed. What's her problem?
She's got a lot of problems, she noted.
Andrew cracked a smile. With you, I mean. What happened? Emma's eyes wandered to a group of shirtless boys playing volleyball.
She called me a whore and punched me in the face.
This perked his attention. Did you deserve it?
Andrew, I'm just asking,
he grinned. Seems like something you wouldn't want to do without reason.
Thanks for taking her side,
Emma frowned. I'm not taking her side. I'm just asking what you did to deserve it. She sighed and looked behind him at the water. You know our friend Liz? She noted. The one who died in China? Yeah, Emma continued, explaining the details of the lawsuit against their father and the audio feed. I told Kent to save himself. You didn't sleep with him, did you?
Ew, no, she shivered. I barely even hugged him. He just likes me.
And what's Margot so upset about? Andrew questioned.
Tell her he shouldn't be so easy to manipulate.
Yeah, I'm sure that would go over well, she mused. She thinks I'm being a hypocrite because of the things I've said about her. Andrew raised an eyebrow, not following. And Jordan? She added, gesturing for him to understand the things she didn't want to say out loud. He nodded. Why do you care about that? He shrugged. That's their business.
Because I don't want anything to happen, Emma raised.
I'm just worried about them. If they're smart about it, they'll be fine, Andrew defended. And if you didn't do anything with Kent, then why does Margot care? Emma shook her head. I don't know, maybe she thinks I'm trying to replace Johnny. Andrew perked up again. Are you?
Of course not, she raged. Do you know how desperate I am to have him back?
She realized her eyes were watering, but she was determined not to let them loose, even in front of her brother. She took a deep breath to calm herself. Andrew noticed and put his arm around over her shoulder. Still nothing? He asked.
Still nothing, she confirmed. I just want something, Even if he was dead, I think I could take that easier than waiting. That's the part that's killing me.
Andrew sighed sympathetically.
I feel like Jordan with his mom, she went on. And Dad, I don't even know if Dad would tell me if he knew.
That's not true, he stiffened, removing his arm to look at her determinedly. If they had anything, you'd be the first to know.
How can you be sure of that? She raised. I don't even think Dad knows what's going on inside his own embassy anymore.
Andrew frowned. Of course he does, he said. Dad's fine.
No, he's not,
Emma denied. You know you didn't have to lie for him, Andrew continued. Dad can handle his own business.
Can he? She shouted. Then tell me why I heard him yelling at Shane over the phone today. He sounded scared, Andrew. Everything he does is just crisis mode after crisis mode, and Shane's the reason Johnny disappeared in the first place. Dad's not in charge anymore.
Andrew's mouth twisted in a disbelieving grin. Is this about your conspiracy with Daniels? He puzzled. You know he was cleared, right?
Yeah, because he has the embassy in his back pocket, she claimed. Johnny? Chervinsky? Heck, even you for that matter.
What do you mean me? Andrew cringed.
I overheard Jordan talking to Margot, Em explained. And he's right. How could your mission fall apart over a silent alarm?
Maybe because Judith was an idiot? He defended.
She only joined our squad this year, and from day one she was a weak link. But shit happens, Emma. Sometimes things just fall apart. And I'm just supposed to believe Shane was there to pick you up, she pushed. How did he know things were going to fall apart?
He didn't, Andrew frowned, an annoyed tone pulling into his words.
Dad sent the hit, she pointed. Shane was already over there to pick up the pieces.
Andrew shook his head. First of all, Shane was over there to help de-escalate things in Warsaw, he argued. And Dad didn't order the hit. Andrei Zahovsky did. Emma stopped.
Who?
The PM from Vyzubrov, Andrew explained. The one who was killed in the bombing.
Then why did...
If you want to point fingers at anybody, point fingers at foreign, he went on. They're the ones that requested Shane. They're the ones that approved my team going over. Emma narrowed her eyes.
You're going to ignore Shane just so you can pin another thing on Richmond?
Andrew matched her curiosity. Richmond's a deputy. He doesn't have any say without Doug's approval.
Doug Symbolic is on our side, Emma remembered. Dad said so.
Yeah, and Dad also said Shane's on our side, he argued. Seriously, if you think Shane has any power over Dad, you're not paying attention. Emma felt her heart drop. It took her a moment to put words to understanding why.
That can't be true, she breathed nervously. Because if that's true, then there really is nothing about Johnny.
Andrew stopped walking completely. He turned to look back at their guards, who had also paused to maintain their distance, then back to Emma with an expression of pity. You'd rather they be hiding something from you than not knowing anything at all?
Yes, she sighed. At least then I could have something to hope for.
The pity in his eyes only grew. Good to know I'm not the only one Dad screwed up, he said. Emma felt her breath catch again.
What's that supposed to mean?
Andrew only reached in to hug her. She tried to ignore the smell of the cigarette as he wrapped her in his arms. I thought you might escape it, he wallowed. Of all three of us, I thought you might get through it unscathed. He let go of her and held her shoulders. So much for that pipe dream. She looked up at his unfamiliar brown hair. Again, she wished it was Riley standing there with her.
Andrew, what am I going to do?
He took his hands away. With what? He wondered cautiously.
Everything, she moaned. Johnny's gone. Everyone in the squad hates me. Dad hates me.
Dad doesn't hate you, he rejected, staring again at the expanse to the west. You're his favorite kid. Bull, she cracked. I'll never be you. You're right, he agreed. But you're his only daughter, and I think that means more to him than you realize. You think he'd ever let you go into real danger the way he does with me? Emma thought back to the mission. Hers safe in the van with Xander. How worried her father had sounded over the phone, if just for her sake. That's different, she remembered. You're right, he agreed again. But there's nothing you can do about it. And Margot? She pushed. I think Dad loves you a lot more than he does Margot, Andrew joked. Emma rolled her eyes. At least your friends are still alive, he continued. I'd give anything to have Sam treating me like a dick again, so long as he was still here. Don't take them for granted. She sighed sympathetically. And Johnny? She reminded.
How do I know he didn't end up like Sam?
Andrew shook his head. You don't, he acknowledged. But there's nothing you can do about it. Seeing the look of pain in her face, he added, You believe in God, though, don't you? You can keep praying about it. Hell, maybe there's something in your little conspiracy that's true. If anybody knows anything, it'd be Doug. I know he's busy with Poland, but if you put in a request to meet him, he'd at least have to put you on the schedule. Andrew shrugged. Ask him if they have any leads, he continued. Even if he says no, you've done literally everything you can. That's got to count for something. She smiled, knowing this was the best he had to offer. Thanks, she said. He gave her a half grin in reply. If there was anything else I could do, I would, he claimed. You know I'd do anything for you, don't you? She nodded. Yeah, she agreed aloud, not sure if she believed him. Thanks, Andrew. The next afternoon, they touched down back in Tylersville. Returning to the protection of the city gates, she immediately booked an appointment for the following evening to return her hair back to normal. In addition to putting in a request to meet with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, she heard back the following morning with a short 15-minute appointment scheduled in for Saturday afternoon. It wasn't much, she reminded herself, but it was something. Taking her father's advice, she attempted to be cordial with the others, first asking Margot about their trip to the mountains, though this was returned with the usual barrage of swearing, and an insult in French which caused Jordan to verbally reprimand her. The pair began arguing in words she could not understand, but thankfully pulled the conversation into Jordan's bedroom, giving Emma the chance to be alone in the common room during the daylight for the first time in weeks. Kent was less approachable. Every time she thought to talk to him, he suddenly disappeared from view or became occupied with someone or something else she thought would be rude to interrupt. At one point, he excused himself from the cafeteria table just as she attempted to join him, hobbling over to sit with a girl she barely recognized as one of Liz's friends. A brief stint of jealousy passed through her, but Emma shook it off and tried to keep her mind focused on Johnny. After a biology test kept her distracted up until the end of the day Friday, she woke Saturday morning desperate to make her way to the embassy. The meeting was not scheduled until 3, but she found herself at the front doors an hour early, exhausted of killing time elsewhere. Making her way to the upper floors housing Foreign Affairs, Emma checked in at the ministry's front desk, then took a seat in the waiting area. 20 minutes passed before she grew bored of scrolling through her phone, so she rose to her feet and began pacing between the waiting room and the elevator. Each ministry had a wall decorated with pictures of its history of leaders, and Emma found herself drawn to this one, particularly enjoying the gap of nearly 5 years in which David Oberon had served as minister. After 1975, his picture had been removed from the lineup, but the history was still plainly hidden for those who knew where to look. At the end of the list was Doug Symbolic, an egg-shaped man with a balding egg-shaped head. Emma had always found him a bit awkward compared to the other officials she knew, but her father repeatedly praised him for what he was able to do within the ministry. He wasn't the sort of politician to win hearts through words or campaigns the way her father Rashane could. He had risen to his position through sheer workmanship, though this path required time most in Tylersville did not have. Closing in on 50, Doug was the oldest person on the embassy's executive board. By the time she grew bored of staring at the pictures, another 20 minutes had passed. She excused herself to the restroom and considered heading up to visit those she knew from her father's office, but thought it best to remain in the waiting room. 10 minutes later, Mike Richmond emerged from his office, did a double-take when he noticed Emma sitting there, then sauntered quickly to the elevator and out of sight. The sight of him made her shiver in her seat. Having grown so accustomed to his challenging her father at every turn, he had become to her the face of opposition. Everything he did was evil. Every motivation of his questionable. As she grew older, she realized how unfair these presumptions were and was trying to work on giving him the benefit of the doubt. He did little to give himself a favorable image. Even then, seeing Emma in his territory, the look he gave her was almost accusatory, as if she was there on mission from the Prime Minister himself to spy on him. Seeing him retreat from his own floor was a small victory. You better run, she thought.
Miss Guerin?
She spun around. The little Asian woman who served as the ministry's secretary was standing on the far edge of the waiting room. Emma looked up at the digital clock above the left hallway. It was 5 minutes past 3.
I'm sorry you've waited this long, the woman apologized. But Minister Symbolic is going to have to postpone your meeting to a later date.
Emma grit her teeth to hide her frustration. She'd half expected this happening given the situation with Poland, but the hope she had in finding answers for Johnny had fueled her for an entire week. Without them, she was directionless.
Would you like to put in for any date in particular? The secretary continued.
Emma shook her head.
No, it's all right, she lied. It wasn't that important.
She thanked the woman and made her way to the elevator, wanting more than anything to punch the wall. On the ground floor, she passed through the lobby just as Shane Daniels walked from one side of the building to the other, watching her exit with the same expression as Richmond. This only furthered her fury. Fueled by disappointment, Emma spent mere moments back in the common room before changing into a sports bra and leggings, and finding herself headed to the school weight room, where she spent 2 hours desperately trying to keep her mind away from Johnny. After an oversized glove slipped and she punched a dummy with her bare hand, a split knuckle told her it was finally time to call it quits. Leaving the building, she could feel every eye in the world watching her, judging her, laughing at her failures. Johnny was gone, and someone was going to have to pay for taking him away from her. If Margot was waiting in the common room, Emma was ready to swing first, and this time she wasn't going to miss. To her frustration, the room was once again empty. The TV was still on, meaning Kent must have just gone to the bathroom, but would soon return. Wanting to avoid another awkward confrontation, she stormed into her own bathroom and swung the shower handle to as hot as it would go. The burning water was the greatest thing she had felt in ages. Her skin was practically glowing red by the time she emerged. Whatever was left of the brown in her hair had gone too, replaced by the familiar dull yellow she had grown so used to over the years, despite all her insecurities. Staring back in the mirror, her father's words echoed in her head. "You will never be the daughter I want you to be." "Well, this is what I am!" she shouted, loud enough that Kent could have heard through the wall. Her face as red as the rest of her naked body. A white light in the mirror forced her eyes to the sink. Her phone dinged with the reception of a message in an unfamiliar number. What now? She thought. She reached down and flitted through her password, and opening the message, knew immediately who had sent it. 2 simple sentences without a signature. Veteran Square in 30. Come alone. Emma dressed faster than she had in her entire life. Ignoring Kent completely, she sprinted back out the front door of the common room and back into the night. She avoided the monorail, storming to the west as fast as she could walk. She was tired of sitting still. She was tired of waiting. In 30 minutes exactly, she emerged on the other side of downtown Taylorsville into the square, ready to demand answers. A bronze statue of 5 men in uniform stood central to a ring of columns, dedicated to the members of the company who had gone on to serve in the armed forces. She took particular note of the Marine, who stared directly at the embassy visible far off in the distance. Above the colonnades, a circle of office buildings were all darkened for the evening, and even though it was a weekend, Emma could not shed the feeling of being watched. A set of footsteps sounded from behind the nearby columns. Emerging from the shadows, Shane was far more underdressed than she had ever seen, a blue knit sweater replacing his typical suit and tie. Adorning his face were a pair of rectangular glasses. "Does anyone else know you're here?" She looked around, suspicious of his question. "No," she uttered. "Why?" Shane stepped into the light of the street lamp, his strange silhouette imposing against the memorial. "I have some news," he said. Emma felt her heart race. "I knew it," she thought, before vocalizing, "Where's Johnny?" Shane flexed his jaw and swallowed. "Safe," he claimed. "You don't need to worry about that." "That's not what I asked," she doubled. "Where is he?" Shane shook his head. "I don't know." "That's bullshit," she cursed. "I know you said something to him that night before we left for China. Where did you send him?" A malicious smile crossed Shane's face. "I thought you would have been informed after the investigation," he stated. "Johnny never met with me at the embassy." Emma rolled her eyes. "Whatever he told you was a lie," Shane continued. "Johnny met with Doug Symbolic that night." "Really?" Emma raised, pulling out her phone. "You mean you didn't send him a cryptic-ass text the way you did with me?" Shane pulled out his own phone. "That's not my number," he noted casually. "That could have been anyone about anything." "You're worse than my dad," she frowned. Shane twisted another smile. "That's where you're wrong again," he said. "Trusting us is the best decision you can possibly make." Emma laughed. "I'm still not convinced you're even on his side. Then let me convince you I'm on yours." Shane pulled off his glasses and folded them into his pockets. "You wanted to know about Johnny? I'm telling you the truth. I don't know where he is. But those who do know have assured me he's safe." "Those who do know," she repeated. "Keeping yourself blissfully unaware to avoid responsibility? When this all blows up in your face, do you really think you'll get away with it?" "You were in the safe house," Shane reminded. "What do you think would have happened if Johnny was there with you?" Emma felt her heart race again. "You knew," she growled. "You knew the whole time that we were going to be ambushed, and you did nothing." "Johnny is safe," Shane repeated. "And so are the rest of you." "And how did you know they were coming?" she screamed. "Who were they?" "Emma, you know I can't answer that," he denied. She shook her head in disgust. "What can you answer?" Shane took a deep breath, eyeing the buildings behind her. "You want to know where Johnny is?" he continued. "We may have found something." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. Do you know anything about our tracker system? The question came out of left field. What the hell does this have to do with Johnny? She almost asked aloud. Something about Shane's expression told her the pair were somehow connected. She took herself to focus. What do you mean? She whispered. The trackers we use on missions? The implants, Shane confirmed. Do you know how they work? Some sort of GPS, I'm assuming. Yes, but specifically how we differentiate between each device, he explained. Everything is sent through the system on a similar frequency, but each person has a specific code programmed to match their identity. Emma frowned, trying to figure out Shane's angle. What does that have to do with Johnny? She raised. He removed his tracker in Beijing. You're right, he did, Shane agreed. Last we heard from Johnny Sparks was January 27th. Emma stared, waiting for Shane to get to the point. So tell me why his tracker went back online yesterday, he noted. About as far from China as you can get. What? Emma gasped. Where? Shane pulled out his phone again, revealing a map pinned at the top of South America. Guyana. Again, she choked on her words. Why there? She managed. Shane put his phone away. We don't know, he claimed. As far as our intelligence can make out, the signal came from an abandoned biotech facility in the middle of the jungle. Is that where you've been keeping him? She accused. I told you, he insisted. I have no idea where he is. Then why would he be there? She questioned. Shane scratched the side of his face. That's the thing, he muttered. We don't know that he is. He removed his tracker, so the odds of it still somehow being connected to his person are slim. Emma lost herself. Then why tell me at all? She shouted. Because it's the best lead that we have, Shane stated. 2 months with nothing, I thought you'd be grateful we finally found something. Found something? She squeaked. How do you know it's not a fluke? Honestly, Shane, Johnny's tracker is suddenly showing up halfway around the world? How can you be sure that's not a mistake? A matching tracker code on the same frequency? He explained. We're talking hundreds of trillions. Emma was still struggling to see anything concrete in the news. So you think Johnny somehow ended up halfway across the world and is just now sending out an SOS? I thought you said he was safe. Shane's face was grim. That's the best guess we have, he continued. My contacts told me that over a month ago. I trust that's still the best case, but if Johnny's alive and looking for us to bring him home, then this is the closest lead that we have to find him. Emma dug her front teeth into her front lip to stop herself from crying. An overwhelming combination of hope, fear, and anxiety were bubbling to the surface again. She took her eyes away from Shane to compose herself. Why are you telling me? She asked. Shane gave no immediate answer. Does my father know? She yelled, loud enough to be heard around the square. No, Shane returned. Your father's kept himself far away from this. Of course he has, she breathed, not sure if it came out loud enough to hear. After a second's pause, Shane spoke again. I'm telling you because I think it's your right to find him, he announced. What? Emma's heart pounded even faster. How would that even... She stopped herself, trying to compose herself. That's a conflict of interest. They never... Shane's gaze was determined, waiting for her to come to some silent conclusion on her own. Her mind raced back through the conversation, trying her best to think the way Johnny would. The lab? Shane's eyes glowed. Bingo. What does that have to do with us? She cried, furious at how hard he was toying with her emotions. Why would you even tell me about Johnny if all of this is just about digging through old science experiments? Because he might be involved, Shane clarified. I want him home as much as you do, Emma. And I know that if I send you instead of someone else, you're not going to stop if you find any shred of evidence to where he might be. So send us, she screamed, half desperation, half irritation. Just put us down for it and quit it with the deep throat gimmick. I'm sick of playing the embassy's games. You know I can't do that, he rejected. There's only 4 of you. We can't authorize an incomplete squad unless you get everyone to apply for it, including Xander. A lead apron had just been thrown over her shoulders. You want me to convince them? She realized. No, he shook his head. I need you to convince them. You 5 are the best chance we have of getting him back home as fast and safe as possible. A sudden urgency began pulsing its way through her veins. I have to get back home. I have to convince them. She didn't even care how much they hated her. They could spend the rest of their lives hating her, just as long as she had Johnny back. Emma looked up at Shane, who was standing patiently. When? As soon as you're ready, he announced. Convince them for his sake. Put in the request and we'll send you. If they said anything else to each other, Emma drowned it out completely. The thoughts of Johnny were so overwhelming, she hardly knew where she was until she stepped foot in the residential center. Her heartbeat was pounding violently through her ears. She could hardly focus enough to see. As soon as her card turned green, she burst through the front door of the common room. Margot and Jordan were on the couch, exactly where she expected them to be. "I need to talk to you," she said breathlessly, her mind clearing as the door closed behind her. Margot gave a colorful response, shooing her toward her bedroom. "Fine," Emma shrugged, determined. She pointed at Jordan. "Just you, then. I need to talk to you, now." "What?" He shot up, eyeing her with a look that was almost excited. "Why?" "Jordan, if you talk to her right now, I swear I will—" He interrupted Margot in French before giving her a peck on the lips. Her face turned red, a look of incredulous anger flushing her cheeks. Jordan turned again. "You were saying?" Emma looked at Margot with piteous elation before turning back to Jordan and taking a deep breath. "It's about Johnny.